of those pilots is now being clarified, but both reportedly ejected from the plane and were parachuted to safety. We do not know where they are at this current moment. But here you can see pictures posted by Turkish media said to show the pilot's descent. Well, for more reaction here, let's bring in aviation security expert Julian Bray from Cambridge in the UK. Julian, thanks very much for coming to speak to us so shortly after this is happening. The Russian jet was brought down on the Syrian side of the border, we know. How likely is it that it crossed the Turkish border before that crash, knowing what we do about the logistics here, the distances?
Well, of course, these jets, well, this is a bomber, in fact, travel at very quickly, very high speed. So it is possible it might have impinged on the Turkish airspace. And the problem here is that we're seeing social media pictures, so we haven't actually got all the facts clarified yet. Now, the Russians are quite clear. They say they didn't violate Turkish airspace, and it was a surface-to-air missile that brought it down. Meanwhile, the Turks are saying it was one of their aircraft. It's a Turkish F-16 jet that actually brought the Russian plane down, which is very worrying anyway. So they really had to sort this one out because there's a major diplomatic row going on. They referred it back to NATO, but it is a complete and utter mess. The one good thing about this, the pilots have ejected and hopefully they've come down on a parachute and they won't be too badly injured. But if the Russians are saying that they have all the images and all the footage and all the data from the jet, they should be able to prove conclusively exactly where it was.
Yeah. Some of the pictures that we're seeing here, I suppose you're seeing the same from that Turkish TV station. They're grainy, they're hard to make out, of course, Julian. But from what we've seen, does it possibly look where it was shot from the air or the ground? Because there are conflicting reports on that. Is it possible to tell by the video where an attack came from?
No, I haven't seen anything that suggests either it was shot down or it's an aerial attack. If it's an aerial attack, you'd expect to see, well, more than one aircraft in the picture. But obviously, the aerial attack can be from many miles away. But I do wonder about some of these social media pictures. So really, again, it's a question of getting the military black box out to find out exactly what's happened. But there's certainly going to be a major row over this because there is an enemy to be fought, and it's not these two fighting each other.
The rescue operation, as we're hearing, is now underway. Do you think it could be a lengthy one because of the region?
I think it will be quite quick because they have helicopters can get in there quite quickly, and hopefully the two Russian pilots are okay. It is a terrible thing to have to eject, and if you ask an RAF pilot, they say, well, if you eject, basically that's your career over because you've basically totaled a very expensive aircraft.
What do you expect to happen now between the two governments in terms of figuring out just what happened here?
Well, there's obviously going to be a lot of diplomatic talks at very high level. Something with the communications aspect of this whole enterprise has gone terribly wrong. And you've got to remember, we've got many different countries now involved, and it is absolutely vital that command and control and communications are very clear between all the various parties. Now, this means that they do have to share information, they have to share intelligence, and they have to share information from the AWACS flying overhead. So what I'm saying to everybody is that they've got to get round the table and really thrash out a way of actually conducting this particular campaign.
And Julian, as you being an aviation security expert here, just talk us through what occurs now in terms of the black boxes, getting the information. How long does that take? How much do you think it's going to tell?
Well, unlike civil airliners, the black boxes on most military aircraft automatically eject. So before the plane has hit the ground and crashed, the black box will have ejected somewhere and will have landed and will be emitting a beacon. So hopefully they can locate this very quickly. And it's something that I've been advocating for civil aviation for a long time, because it means that it's not actually tangled up in the wreckage or the debris. So if they can recover those, that should be okay. However, military communications are far more superior than civil aviation communications, and I'm quite certain the Russians know to within a few meters exactly where that aircraft was. They would have tracked it, plotted it, and they'll know exactly whether they are over the border, in the border, or on the border. So all that needs to come out. Whether the powers that be want to share the information is another matter. The Turks at the moment are saying their airspace has been violated, and they warned 10 times, but the point is, who do you believe? At the moment, we have the only clear thing is that the plane has come down, the pilots have ejected. Everything else is conjecture.
Will the black boxes be able to really announce whether it was artillery fire, that which is what the Russian Ministry of Defense are saying? Is that some kind of information that the black boxes can tell?
Well, yes, because hopefully you'll also have the pilots' conversation on the actual flight deck, and they will know whether they've been locked on, because basically what happens, a little display comes up which says, yes, they've got locked on, so then they start trying to maneuver away from the missile. However, we are actually talking about a huge bomber. We're not talking about a small fighter aircraft, and so it's a bit like turning around an oil tanker. It does take a little while.
Julian Bray, aviation security expert, thank you very much for coming on the programme and updating us on just what we can expect, I suppose, in the next number of hours and days. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, let's just return to our breaking news story, as Julian was saying. Russia's defense ministry says that a fighter that went down on the Turkish-Syrian border was a Russian Su-24 frontline bomber jet. It insists that the plane did not violate Turkish airspace, but was downed from the ground, and that mission data that they hold can prove that. The jet was flying at an altitude of 6,000 meters, according to the Russian military. And this video is from Turkish TV. It shows a jet crashing there quite clearly. The Turkish military says the jet was shot down by its warplanes after it ignored warnings. The plane went down in the Kızıldag Mountains, which are currently a point of conflict between Syrian government troops and militants. Debris from the plane hit two people on the ground in a Syrian village. The Turkish Prime Minister has ordered the country's top diplomat to consult with NATO, the UN and all parties concerned with the situation on the Syrian border. Just in contrast, Russia's defense ministry has said that, quote, "We are looking into the circumstances of the crash of the Russian jet. The Ministry of Defense would like to stress that the plane was over Syrian territory throughout the flight." And Russia also said, as we were talking with Julian Bray, our aviation expert, that the Su-24 plane was down by artillery fire. We are, of course, waiting confirmation on a lot of different information coming into us on this breaking news. Well, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the fate of the pilots is now being clarified, but both reportedly ejected from the plane and parachuted to safety. We've been looking at pictures posted by Turkish media. In fact, here they are, which is said to show the pilot's descent. It's not very clear to make out. You can see a parachute. We, again, cannot confirm whether that is from the exact area where this occurred on the Syrian-Turkish border. Well, Russia's Air Force has recently stepped up efforts against Islamic State's main source of income. This is a story we've been following earlier in the day. Dozens of ISIL-held oil facilities have been destroyed in recent airstrikes. Russian Defense Ministry reports that over 1,000 trucks loaded with crude oil were bombed in the past 5 days or so. Let's take a look at some of the latest footage released by Russia's Defense Ministry. Airstrikes have been carried out by planes sent from Russia and by jets inside Syria. The Defense Ministry reports that terrorist command centers and control systems have been completely destroyed in some Syrian regions, most notably in the area around the northern city of Aleppo, which is quite near the Turkish border as well, up there in the northwest area of Syria. OK, Ilya Petrenko is here joining me in the studio, just digesting all this information, a lot of stuff coming into us, Ilya. First and foremost, Turkey's playing a complicated role in this region, isn't it? Just kind of break it up for us.
Well, that's absolutely right. First of all, it's a very important regional player with a lot of national interests in the region. Now, there are several sticking issues. For example, well, they're famous for the anti-Assad rhetoric, their position in terms of that. There are also tensions with the Kurds, the Kurdish population, both inside Turkey and in Syria, and also tensions with Iran. And Ankara has also been known for complaining over the Russian mission in Syria, the Russian airstrikes that are ongoing. You've just talked about the latest missions carried out by the Russian airplanes. So, of course, in terms of the consequences of that incident over the Turkish-Syrian border, of course, if Turkey indeed carried out, if Turkey indeed downed that fighter jet, it should have been aware of the difficulties and of the consequences that this is going to lead to a lot of tension with Russia and all this boiling pot, that of Syria at this moment. It just makes the situation really difficult.
Just to update our viewers for the moment, we are expecting Russian President Vladimir Putin to make a statement on this. We will, of course, carry it when it happens and bring you up to date with what was said by the Russian leader. Ilya, Turkey, it's repeatedly come into the spotlight here, hasn't it, for its controversial policy in the region. Tell us more about those policies.
Well, I can tell you that even its allies, the United States, at some point accused Turkey of buying oil illegally from Islamic State. And a report came from the U.S. Treasury. That was back in the year 2014.
That's astonishing, though, isn't it? That they're buying oil from a terrorist group and Turkey and America are affiliated in this region. And when you see the sheer amounts of volume and the prices here, making ISIL the most richest terrorist group in the world, that's something else. We'll talk about that later, perhaps, but it's just an aspect which is quite astounding, really.
It is astounding, and of course, Vladimir Putin, during the G20 summit that
spoke on this, didn't he?
He talked about this, and he didn't mention Turkey specifically, but he said that he does have evidence that there are G20 countries who are involved in this illegal trade. Let's take a listen.
All
right. Based on our data, I provided examples of the financing of different Islamic State units in different countries by private individuals. Financing, as we have established, comes from 40 countries, and there are some of the G20 states among them.
And, you know, this is an aspect I hear a lot being talked about now. I wasn't heard a lot about in the past, but for instance, in Britain, we know that the Saudi leader came to Britain, met with David Cameron. There was a lot of talk about, you know, the Saudi links, although that's not confirmed, of course, but, you know, the government there, whether they're buying oil, who's buying oil, where's this money coming from and going to? How come ISIL is so rich? Who is actually buying on the black market what they're selling?
Well, I can tell you that in that U.S. Treasury report, there were also other sides blamed for cooperating with Islamic State, including the government of Bashar al-Assad and also the Kurds. But Turkey was in that list, and that is very important just because they are an ally of the United States. They are a permanent member of NATO, and of course, when they are announcing goals to fight the Islamic State, and when it seems that like they're on the same side of the barricade when it comes to the fight against this terrorist organization, it just really seems very complicated and strange.
Well, there's that saying, isn't there? Follow the money and you'll find the truth. And some of our graphics just showing on the screen as you were talking, Ellie, shows that $1.5 million worth of oil goes into the pockets of ISIL every day from oil sold on the black market. And that's what Russia's been trying to do, isn't it? They've been bombing these oil refineries and regions in the oil-rich area, which ISIL is now in control of around Raqqa and other areas. And that's something which has been stressed upon by the Russian president. This is what they're going to do. We're going to find out where this money is coming from and really stop the flow of cash.
You're absolutely right. Vladimir Putin focused on that during his press conference after the G20 Actually, this summit was, so to say, the turning point. That's when both the Russian Air Force and also the Western allies started bombing the Islamic State oil infrastructure and those trains of trucks or whatever you call them.
The convoy, wasn't it?
The
really,
convoys.
essentially.
Again, Russia at that time provided photographic evidence, some kind of space images of these convoys. And by looking at these images, it was clear that the scale of this oil trade is enormous, as you've mentioned.
Ilya Petrenko, thank you for updating us on that. Well, let's now get more reaction to our breaking news story this hour and try and cross to Alexander Pavich, a political analyst. Alexander, we appreciate you coming on the programme. The Russian jet, we know, came down on the Syrian side of the border. In your opinion, how likely is it that it crossed the Turkish border before the crash? We're hearing from Ankara that it did. We're hearing from the Ministry of Defence here in Russia that it did not categorically do that.
Well, Russia has no interest in breaching Turkish airspace. And even if on the remote possibility that something like that happened, it would clearly be something that wasn't on purpose. So in any case, Turkey, to say the least, overreacted, knowing very well how serious the consequences would be. So we need to think about what were the motives of Turkey for doing this. Just a few days ago, the Security Council brought a resolution on the united fight against terrorism, specifically mentioning ISIL and Al-Qaeda and all related terrorist organizations, which meant it called for the entire world to fight against the terrorists, which were clearly identified. So why is Turkey shooting at a key member of this anti-terrorist, in fact, the leading member of this anti-terrorist coalition? This is the question that must be answered.
Well, that's what I want to say to you. Turkey says it's taking a tougher stance against Islamic State, apparently, and yet now, as we're hearing just a couple of hours ago, it downs a jet of a country waging a war on terrorism in the region. Just your thoughts on that, Alexander?
The question is, we may never find out, of course, is whether Turkey did this by itself or whether it got a green light from someone who is not interested in a successful anti-terror coalition. We may take a few wild guesses as to who that might be, a country strong enough to tell Turkey to do something like this. But we know very well that for the past 3 years, the Western states have not answered Russia's calls for a united front against terrorism. So this may be, in fact, a somewhat disguised attempt at sabotaging a potential common front against terrorism, meaning some forces in the West just don't want to have a united front against the terrorists, which they helped to create in the first place. This is something that must come to anyone's mind when you see something like this happen, because this is absolutely ridiculous. This serves no purpose in the anti-terror campaign. On the contrary, this is something that could prove to be a very big obstacle toward making a united anti-terrorist front.
Well, we should just confirm that it's Ankara who said they took down the plane that they say was flying over Turkish airspace. Ankara has been long accused of profiting from ISIL's illegal oil trade. Is it a mere coincidence that the Russian plane was down now, do you think, after Russia put its focus, as we were just speaking about, you might have heard with Ilya Petrenko here, its focus on disrupting Islamic State's oil infrastructure, which we know makes ISIL the richest terrorist organization in the world?
Well, it was certainly a convenient time for this to have happened, because we know it's an open secret that Turkey has been profiting from the illicit trade by ISIL of oil extracted from Syria. In fact, mujahideen from all over the world that come to Syria and Iraq to fight against the governments there many of them cross through Turkey. That whole border is just not controlled. And in fact, Turkey has been a beneficiary of all this financially and strategically, because they've been declared themselves as being opposed to Assad, meaning the legal government of Syria, since 2012. And really, Turkey is probably does not want to renounce all these profits that are pouring into its budget illegally, or its companies, people close to the Turkish establishment, etc. But once again, is it worth it if you're against the terrorists, which you say you are, publicly? What do you want to accomplish by this? There is no way. The terrorists, it is well known, they don't have an air force. So there is no mystery. If a plane is flying close to your border, it's definitely not a terrorist airplane. It can only be either a Syrian airplane of the Syrian government or a Russian airplane. Meaning you are deliberately taking the side of terrorists by doing this.
And I suppose that's going to be the main talking point when the top diplomats of the two countries meet. What political consequences could this now have on Russian-Turkish relations, do you believe?
Well, Russia is probably going to weigh the odds, the pros and cons of its own reaction, because Russia has been working very close with Turkey over the past few years, especially in the past year, of some very important energy projects, specifically a gas pipeline that's supposed to go to Europe through Turkey. And once again, this is something that was not well received in Western capitals, and they would just love for something to happen to disrupt Turkish-Russian relations, specifically concerning energy flows. So once again, is Russia going to allow this sort of major incident to disrupt very big geopolitical plans, which are related to its own relations, not just with Turkey, but with Europe as well? On the other hand, as a big power, just as a sovereign state, you can't ignore someone downing your plane. So I'm sure that Russia is going to ask for an explanation, but I think that Russia will, as always, be open to some sort of good logical explanation and some sort of compensation, or at least an announcement or a statement from the Turkish side saying that they regret that this happened. But it's a very difficult situation, and whoever did it knew very well the problems that this would cause.
Well, you mentioned logic there. Russian and American air forces have coordinated their flights in the region in order to avoid situations like this one, which of course makes sense. But why is there no coordination of flights between Russia and Turkey?
Once again, that's a very good question. Well, Turkey really doesn't want that, because Turkey is interested, for one, when they did militarily intervene in Syria, it's been against the Kurds. The Kurds are the main problem for Turkey, and yet the Kurds are one of the key elements in the fight against ISIL. On the ground, you have Syrian forces, government forces, and you have the Kurdish forces, which are really, hard to replace. You don't have a replacement for them right now, and yet Turkey has been concentrating a majority of its own military moves in Syria against the Kurds, not against ISIL. So, once again, we see the paradoxical situation in which Turkey is. And, Turkey, of course, claims that it's fighting against terrorists, but we know its main stated purpose is to remove the Assad government and to prevent the Kurds from forming an autonomy in Syria along the border with Turkey, because once again, they're afraid of the effect that would have on their own Kurdish population inside Turkey. So Turkey has to walk a tightrope once again, but it's not playing with open cards, and that's a big problem, not just for everyone else, but for Turkey itself.
Alexander Pavich, political analyst, thank you very much for coming on RT International and sharing your thoughts with us this hour.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.